Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show, and today we have another incredible guest on. I'm super excited about this podcast and going to ask some personal questions as far as things that I can do and some family members can do to really launch and grow their publicity. But Mickie Kennedy, he's been in this industry for a long time, as in he's had lots of experience. You know, he's not that old, he's still young, but he's had a lot of experience. So sometimes experience can double multiple years. So is the founder and president of Erleases, the small business leader for press release distribution. He's been in it for 24 years. So that's exciting, just talking to somebody who has lots of seasoned experience. He's an expert in helping small businesses increase their visibility and their credibility. And he's going to share some of those things today. One of the things that I'm excited to hear more about, and this is applicable for everybody who's interested in sharing a message, we'll put it that way. And I think that that's an important part of legacy, is learning to share your message. But one of the things he does is teaches you how to increase your visibility and credibility using press releases to promote authors, small businesses, and startups. And then the second thing is how to get regular local media coverage without spending a dime. So that's just a taste of some of the things we're going to be covering here in the later end of the podcast. But Mickie, go ahead and introduce yourself if I missed anything, and then tell us a little bit about where you came from. Where did you come up with this idea that it was important to be in the public eye, or at least get free press coverage? And why are you so passionate about it today?
Okay. So I started Erleases 25 years ago, and I actually started working towards that goal about a year before that. I was working at a telecom research startup as employee number 3, and I had just gotten a MFA in creative writing degree, and they saw writing and said, hey, write press releases, figure those out and send them to the media for us. And I did that, and I started to find what the media really wanted was a story. And we published a lot of data and numbers, so I'd look for the stories behind the data, and I would articulate those and put those in a press release and send them out. And we started getting a lot of pickup. We got, regularly Financial Times, Economist, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, a lot of major publications, not just in the US, but globally. And I just said to myself, wow, why aren't other people doing this? And what was also happening at the same time was I was faxing these press releases and, having to program 100 numbers in a fax machine that only held 100 numbers. And, it was tedious. And a lot of journalists would call and say, hey, there's a lot of data there. Could I just have you email that over to us, and we could work with the copy a lot easier there. So I just thought to myself, email is great. It's relatively new, and let me just see if I can get journalists to agree to receive releases from me. So I started in the after hours and weekends just reaching out to journalists and asking if I could send them releases on their beat, what industries they covered, and almost all of them at the time said yes. And so after about a year of contacting journalists, I launched 25 years ago with 10,000 journalists in my database. And I was just pretty much a matchmaker. I would take a press release for a client in a particular industry and figure out what the journalists were that would be most receptive to that, and just, hit send and send it on. After a few years, PR Newswire, which is a newswire of press releases, reached out to us and said they liked what we were doing, and was there a way that we could work together? I didn't think there would be, because at the time, I think they're charging $1,200 to $1,500 for like a 600-word press release. And my clients were paying at the time, I think $250. And I just the gap was so big, I didn't think we'd be able to work together. But, given the volume that we had, the fact that we served a population that they didn't, their salespeople were out trying to cultivate relationships with people who are spending $10,000 to $20,000 a year in PR services, and my clients are not spending anywhere near that. So I just thought they wouldn't be interested. But we worked and found a way to make it a win-win. I noticed when I visited their editorial staff, they talked that they had an overnight editorial team that was very lean, but they had to be there in case there was breaking news or recall, or a U.S. company needed to get something out to Asia or something along those lines. And they often sat idle. And so I came up with the idea of, why don't I schedule my releases for next business day by default? And that way it wouldn't cost any additional labor for them to set up those releases for my clients. And so just working together, trying to find a win-win, we were able to do that. And we've been working together, I think, for over 10 years now. And it's just a really great value add that people get. They get a national distribution over a wire without paying, anything close to $1,500. And I've been able to sit back and watch releases that work and don't work. We move anywhere from 10,000 to 14,000 releases a year. And it's a really great vantage point to figure out what are the types of releases that are meaningful and are working for my clients, and those that don't. And I am really big about sharing that with my customers as well as other people, and just letting them know what's out there and what's available and what they could be doing that's working for other clients.
That's awesome. And so if we were going back even farther before you started talking about where you were at in the telecom company, where did you grow up? Like, how did that even get into that being a desire to be in that industry?
Right. So I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, around fields that alternated. One year it'd be corn, the next year it'd be tobacco, and then I think soybeans in between. So that's sort of where I grew up. I went to college in Greenville, North Carolina, East Carolina University, and I fell in love with words and decided to pursue a degree in creative writing. So I went to Northern Virginia and went to George Mason University, where I got an MFA in creative writing with an emphasis in poetry. I didn't have any lofty goals of becoming a famous poet, but I just enjoyed writing and I wanted to pursue it and see where it took me. And growing up, my father was an electrician, owned his own business. My grandfather owned a series of businesses. He would start something, get bored, move on to something else, sell that business or close it up. And so I thought that if you have an idea, you can establish a business, and it sort of became something that I felt was in my wheelhouse and something that I wanted to try.
That's awesome. And so creative writing was the background, just following your passion from the very beginning and saying, I want to do this rather than doing did you have people while you were growing up that thought you should do one thing and you just said, no, I'm going to do what I want? Or what was everybody always just supportive of your dreams?
Well, I was the first person in my family to go to college. So they were just happy that I was going to college. They weren't really pushing me in any one particular direction. I loved biology, and I was president of the biology club in high school. So when I went to college, I thought that I was going to just get a biology degree. And I took a biology class and turned in a paper my first semester. And the teacher said, don't take any more biology classes until you take some English classes. You really got to work on your writing. Your writing's not very good. And so I did that. And I took a bunch of electives. I took a bunch of writing classes, and I just fell in love with it. I saw a lot of progression, my ability to sort of, get the words out. And, the beauty of language was opened up to me. And it was a love affair that's still going strong today. I'm still writing poetry, mostly for myself and a few little places that I send it out to. But it is something that I find, very fascinating, and just a powerful way to sort of articulate your feelings and your relationship with the world.
That's awesome. I think that's huge. Thank goodness for some well-intentioned and insightful educators or people who care about you and say, hey, yeah, this might be interesting, but go develop some of these other skills that'll make you more serviceable no matter where you are. And now, yes, you are a better writer, and that ended up being your end goal passion. And that's interesting. So that question, again, because the goal of what I'm looking for is, what are the questions that led Mickie to do what he did? So one of the questions that you mentioned was, okay, I see that this is happening. These people are sitting around. There's a gap in the market that could be filled. The data is kind of boring. How do I make this data more exciting? They want a story. How do I make a story out of this? And I think that's a huge question in life, especially when we're talking about legacy. We have these, what we consider run-of-the-mill daily activities, daily experiences that are just happening in our life. And some people, all they see is the facts of what's happening, and they find it sometimes depressing or not exciting or whatever. But the people that I find are the happiest in life know how to create a positive story about what's going on in their life. Like they view their life as if they're the hero in their story, and they just had this thing that they get to overcome, and they talk and they operate as if they're the lead character of a story. And they view their life that way. And so nothing ever is too terrible for them, versus the other people who, they also tell stories, but they don't recognize they're telling stories. And they're telling really negative stories about what happened, what is happening, and what's going to happen. And so learning to control the narrative of your story is really important. It's a super valuable thing for yourself, your own mental health. But then also when you're passing stories down from generation to generation, how are you doing that effectively so that other people have the benefit of learning from your story? So what have you learned? Well, I guess first, what type of data was it that you were working with originally that you needed to turn into a story?
So we were publishing telecom traffic statistics, mostly between countries. So like between us and saying, a particular country like Germany, what was the traffic between the US and Germany? Could also be Caribbean countries, just globally what the traffic figures were. When
you say traffic, just so I want to be clear, because
it was voice
how many
telecom
calls
traffic.
were going each direction?
Right. The number of minutes, it's measured in minutes, and how many minutes of telecom traffic was taking place at the time. And you would see like all of a sudden a 20-30% increase in traffic to one particular country. And it might be because, a large Microsoft, for example, might be creating a new support in that small country, and all of a sudden there's a lot more traffic moving between the countries. It could be lots of other indicators, but a lot of people were interested in the data because investments are made along these lines. Like, hey, it looks like this country is heating up. A lot of economic activity can be detected as a result of telecom traffic, and people all of a sudden pouring money and resources and time into a particular country as a result of that. So it was really interesting. Governments use the data, investors, other telecom carriers would use it for just looking at markets they may want to move into, or look at trends and things along those lines. And there was one Caribbean country, I can't recall what it was, but during the time it just exploded with telecom traffic to and from the United States. And when we pressed on that, we found out that it was becoming a center for 1-900 numbers, which were really popular at the time. And they were setting up call centers down there to handle these 1-900 numbers. And that was the reason for it. And that was one that did really well. A lot of publications liked that and wrote about that.
Yeah. So you have this data that seems boring. I mean, it's like, well, what does this do? You just described it. It's like, it's for investors, it's for government, it's for a very select type of individual or a person that's going to be reading that. And I'm not saying you can't have press releases that are just to those individuals, because that's also important. But like pulling the story out of that, as far as what makes that interesting to the general population, that you would want everybody to know about it. You'd want news stations to know about it. Like, what are 2 or 3 things that you would say, hey, these are the elements of a good story that you can pretty much pull out of any data or any circumstance? If you're looking for these 2 or 3 points, you can create a solid narrative that somebody would want to report on.
Right. I think that one of the easiest things is, are there anomalies? Like all of a sudden a huge uptick in one country that just is an outlier for everybody else. try to ask questions around that and determine why is that. Sometimes it's just natural, economic cycle in that country. Things are heating up, but sometimes there's little stories. It could be, that they received a huge amount of funding from other places, or I know that Costa Rica received an increase when Amazon moved a lot of customer support down to Costa Rica, and so that was some interesting numbers and stories coming together that you were able to articulate a story to the journalist. The journalists are by and large storytellers themselves. And if you look at how a good article is written, it often follows a story arc. And so many people who write press releases, I think, forget that. And they don't really give the elements necessary to tell a story in their press release. And that's often why they sort of fall flat. But I think that if you can sort of take some really interesting data and numbers and tell the story, and it's an intriguing story, the journalist will take that, translate it, and explore it a little bit more in depth in an article. And that's the real power of storytelling. And a lot of people don't really take for granted their story. If you look at people who appear on Shark Tank, the first thing they're going to do is tell you their story, who they are, what led them to create this product or this company. It might be a story of things obstacles they've overcome, or, personal health challenges, or it might just be just a little bit of whimsy and how they came up with a silly idea that they thought, hey, there could be a business here. And I think the reason stories resonate so well with people is because there's a human interest element to it. The humanness is one of the things that just connects us all, and we all like to feel connected, and stories allow us to do that.
Sure. And so the anomalies and asking questions, do you feel like that was something you learned in college, or is it something you've learned over time? I mean, I guess you've probably done both, honestly, but which one do you feel like has had a greater impact? The experience over time of like knowing which questions to ask to pull out the right story, or at least a compelling story. There's never going to be a right story. There's 1,000 angles to any story, but pull out a compelling story that's really going to be marketable. How are you keeping track of the market trends and what the public is actually interested in reading? Because that's probably changed a ton over the last 25 years. And probably even goes in cycles. So how are you staying up to date on, like, how do we always share the right angle for what the public wants to consume right now?
Yeah, I think the important thing is just to stay involved, be a reader, look at your industry, what's covered, what's not covered. If you're, often we go to conferences and trade shows and we talk to colleagues and say, hey, have you noticed this? And it's something that nobody's reported on. Those are right stories often to share to the media. I call them, translating the gaps. Is there something that your industry isn't really talking about, but is happening within your industry? And, it could be, all of a sudden, have you noticed that everybody who's paying net 30 is now trying to slow pay and get it to 60 and 90 days? Then, that could, be signs of some economic slowing up within your industry, especially if you talk to other colleagues and they're sharing the same concerns. So, that might be ripe for sharing an angle of a press release that focuses on, the tightening up of capital and maybe how to be a little bit more, providing more services for less or more value for less, and sort of trying to position yourself there in a tightening sort of economic situation. And I think that it is one of the things that happens with a lot of people, where they get inundated with data and they don't really recognize what are the opportunities that are there. And it does require sometimes for you to step back and sort of look at the industry and figure out, hey, everybody's talking about this trend. It seems like being, going green and being environmentally sound is a really positive thing and gets a lot of talk in a lot of industries, especially the automotive industry, where electric cars seem to be, all in the news all the time. And yet you could also even take a contrarian standpoint and say, hey, I feel like electric cars are great, but here are some downsides to that and some things we need to figure out before we move forward. The batteries being mined in not environmental situations, not to mention labor challenges with people who are mining. Also, you have what are we going to do with these batteries at the end of their life, as well as the safety factor. Sometimes it takes 25,000 gallons of water to put out an electric car fire. So we should really figure this stuff out before we embrace it so completely. And that's a way to seem reasonable and position yourself as a contrarian. And the great thing about every time there's an article that talks pro-electric car, you stand the chance that they'll plug you in, because journalists like to be fair and balanced and cover both sides. But if no one's raising their hand and saying, hey, I want to put out a contrarian viewpoint, then the story just gets written one-sided. And so you can get a lot more success being a contrarian on certain viewpoints, as well as exposing, as I mentioned, gaps that are out there that people just aren't taking advantage of.
I think that's an interesting tidbit there, and I hope that people go back and re-listen to it, because I think that it is important, learning how to properly contrast a situation and not to unfairly demonize the other side, but to bring up good actual points that are like, hey, what are we going to do with these situations? So again, if we go back to kind of how could we use this in our personal life? Because obviously there's a large value for somebody who wants to maybe, I don't know if they just want to be recognized, get free press, or they have an objective, but what about using these same skills for positive news that's maybe just happening in your family, and this really cool thing happened, and I'll give you a specific example in a minute, but this cool thing happened. Let's share that with the world and maybe get some traction and information about it. How do you go about getting like regular local media coverage on a certain type of activity?
Right. So local media is really some of the easiest media to get. And I think a lot of people are intimidated with approaching the media, but you got to realize the media, these journalists, these writers, these producers and bookers, they're not celebrities, and they're members of the community, and they want to be accessible. So if you read your local paper and realize what writer or couple of writers cover your industry, take notes, reach out to them and ask for their email address and say you'd like to send them some story ideas. Do the same thing with if you're lucky enough to have a business magazine and or a business newspaper in your area. Do your research, figure out who writes and covers your industry, get their email address. If there's community papers that sometimes cover your industry, those could be good sources. Also look at TV and radio programs. Are there sometimes ones that spotlight or interview or talk to people within particular industries? Ask for the producer or booker of that segment, get their email address, and create your own Rolodex. We're talking probably less than 10 people. So it sounds like a terrible ask, but it really isn't. It's just really getting the email address of less than 10 people and then just pitching them ideas. I say do this at least quarterly. You can do it more frequently if you have more ideas, but you are going to just communicate. You're not sending a press release, you're just sending an idea. And if you see something trending in your industry, you could actually just say, hey, I've noticed that in my industry, there's been a lot of talk about going green and environmental, and I'd love to talk to you about my dry cleaning store and what we're doing to go green and how we are helping the community by not adding to pollution and other types of carbon waste. And, include an amazing quote, which is a sentence or two sentences where you just really say something succinctly and powerful. A journalist can form a whole story around a great quote. So put a great quote in there and make yourself available to them. Send it to them and sit back and watch and see what happens. Sometimes nothing happens. And so you just have to keep investing in the relationship. Try it again in 2 or 3 months or on a regular basis as you have another idea. And what you'll find is after a while, you will get media pickup. And after a couple of years, you'll have them reach out to you without you sending anything to them. They'll be working on a story and they're looking to plug in a local business, and they remember, oh yeah, I remember this dry cleaner. He would probably be great for this. Let me give him a call or reach out to him and see if he'd give me a quote for the story. And it's one of the reasons that, at least with my local paper, the Baltimore Sun, we kind of see the same companies again and again. They get recycled. So there'll be a nonprofit initiative, and they talk about how this company is giving back to through a charitable effort. And then there'll be a story about, people working from home, and, some people not wanting to go back into the office, and they'll use that company as an example. And the reason is it's just easier for the journalist to reach out to someone that they has been reaching out to them, and they sort of are establishing a relationship. So, no one's really paying money for that access. It's just they are easily ready and available, and you can make yourself an asset locally and get that local coverage yourself.
So I love that. So again, I'm not interrupting him because I'm actually like so enthralled with what he's saying, and I'm taking notes. But so where is the best place? So let's say I'm on a local newspaper, I'm on one of these things, and I see this person is the person writing it. Where do you go connect with that person? Like, how do you get their email address? Do you call the newspaper? Do you go to LinkedIn? Yeah. Like, where are you going to get their information?
I just call the newspaper and ask if I could get their email address. A lot of times the person who answers the phone doesn't have it, but they'll immediately just forward your call to their desk, and you can leave a message and just say, hey, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Scott. I'm with local ABC dry cleaners, and I'd love to pitch you a story. I could send you via email. Here's my number. Here's my email address, and then go from there. You may have to do it a couple of times, but eventually you'll get it. You could also check LinkedIn, but I don't see a lot of journalists putting their contact information on LinkedIn like they used to years ago. You could also check Twitter or X and see if they're on there. Some journalists are on there, and you can certainly try to DM them there. But it's not very difficult to get most people's email addresses. These are members of the media. They know they need to be accessible. If they have an iron wall around them, stories aren't going to get through, and they're not going to be great writers, especially when it comes to making it relevant to the local community. So just keep trying, and most of the time you'll get through there on the first time and get their email address.
Yeah, I think that's something that I wanted to call back to from when you were telling your story, that you had said, okay, there's all these people who are sitting around waiting for the urgent news, but if I make my stuff that always be the day after, then I don't have to be the main news cycle all the time, but there's going to be ebbs and flows in the news cycle. And as long as whenever they need a story, they're using my story, right? There's times when the news cycle is full and they don't need any stories. Like, they're busy writing other stories. But there's also times when they're like, who has a story this morning? We have to put something in the news. It's like, we can't just not post something. We need a story. We need to talk about something today, And so then my question, because you had mentioned some pricing as far as like what you were doing press releases for, and then what this other company was doing, $1,200 versus $250. And you had found the consumer, and there's two consumers in my mind in your position. There's the consumer of the journalist, and there's the consumer of the person who wants their stuff to be heard. But the journalists, they also need stories to publish. So is the journalist, like, are they charging money for the story? I'm trying to find out which way the money flows, and why does the money flow the way it does? Because if a journalist has an incentive to have a story, are they buying the story from you? And I say buying as in not like expensive, but $250, you can send it out to however many press release places. But where's the money flowing in this equation? Sure.
So the client who's sending the press release is paying to send it through my service, or going directly to a newswire and sending it. The journalist never takes money. If it does, they're required to put advertisement on the top of the article, and they would never want their name associated with a byline for a paid article.
Right.
It's there's a lot of ethics in journalism that prevent you paying money and being included, but there are places that do specialize in that, that put what looks like an article on a page, and the font's usually different from the rest of the paper, and it's a paid or sponsored thing. I've seen some that look really close to the original thing, but it also says sponsored content or advertisement or something on the top of it. Most of the stuff we're talking about is original articles written by the journalist. They're choosing to decide what they want to cover, and they're choosing the angle. I mean, there's an angle that you wrote the release, but it doesn't mean that they have to take that angle. For example, Microsoft is always putting out bad news with good spins on it. Like, hey, we're closing down all of our online bulletin boards and chat rooms, and we're doing this for safety concerns. And then they're like, well, if you look at the 10K filings, the truth of the matter is they haven't been able to monetize this through advertising. No one wants to be on these spots. So that's the real reason they closed it down. They're not getting rid of other modes that we talk and communicate. So they're just using this as a excuse. So journalists can do a little bit of research and figure out what the real story is and take a different position and take what was originally a positive press release and turn it negative. They generally don't do that for small businesses unless you're really hiding something. But it is interesting, that you can't control ultimately how your content is consumed and how they put it out there as an article. But most of the time it is in the same spirit by which the press release is written.
Sure. So with that being said, then again, I just like clarity. And I think it's all good. So that when somebody's paying for that service, are they really paying for the relationship that company, i.e. yourself or somebody else, has built with all of these journalists? They're buying access to that Rolodex to make sure that their stuff actually gets seen and actually gets published rather than just burning their own wheels. Is that kind of the benefit of using
exactly? It's going through a vetted service that has a relationship with the journalist. In the case of PR Newswire, for example, I mentioned Newswire. Newswire is just a place in which all of these releases are aggregated. And it used to be they would be wired into newsrooms. They'd spit out dot matrix paper and stories, but now it's all done over the internet. A journalist has a login at PR Newswire, for example, and they can customize the feed that they see. So maybe they cover the telecom industry, and they can actually look at the telecom industry feed, and they can actually even customize it by including things that are exclusions. Like, I don't want any release that mentions, I don't know, AT&T, for example, or cellular. And they could also have inclusions. Make sure you definitely cover it every time this word's mentioned, even if it falls outside of my normal telecom feed, and just capture it and stuff like that. So the value of this is journalists are under deadline. They're having to produce content all the time. As you may or may not know, print is suffering. And so journalists are expected to do more with less. And as a result of that, they're really looking for stories in an easy place to find them. And the newswires make that very easy for them. They can look at by headline, 20, 30 headlines at a time, see one that's engaging, click on it to view more, and read the press release and hopefully be taken in and say, yes, this is a story I would like to share with my audience, because journalists are gatekeepers and they're having to determine what stories their audience would want to read about. What would they find entertaining? What would delight them? What would they find educational and just want to know? And so that's the position they take. They really don't care that you're trying to sell more product or position yourself in the best way possible. But often, if you can communicate something that would be appealing to their audience, you can accomplish both through a press release.
Okay. So then how I guess in my mind, I think press release, you probably only, when I initially think about it, I think, well, I'm probably only going to press release about a certain activity or thing at a certain time. But that may not be the case. Maybe you have multiple press releases about the same thing. I have no idea. So how frequently is it, I'm going to use the word recommended. That may not be the right word, but to actually do a press release on. Let me back up. So I have a sibling who their child has gotten some type of cancer, and I forget what kind it is. As a result of that, well, not really as a result of that. Before he got cancer, she had started a small pancake mix business. And then obviously cancer came and that disrupted their life. And so there was a need for that business to change and move. So then there's this, I mean, it's an ongoing story. How does this family deal with a small business and also care for their child that's 2 years old or 3 years old that has cancer? So it's kind of an ongoing story, but also there are some maybe ulterior motives of maybe they could get some more press coverage and increase their business, which would lighten the load of caring for their child. So how would that fit into this press release type system? And what about those circumstances? Because there's probably lots of people with those circumstances. How do you present that in a way to journalists or local media in a way that they're like, okay, we want to know more at the very least. We want to investigate and see if that's something we would want to do press releases on.
Right. So I think that you sometimes just have to explore and figure out what is it that's compelling or interesting. Struggling with a small business and a family health issues is something that a lot of people will identify with. So there could be a human interest story there that a journalist would find engaging and want to share. Especially the local media, they're much more apt to share these like local human interest stories and how you're trying to overcome something or deal with something. Challenges are things that people identify with, and mistakes and obstacles are also things that people identify with. They're natural part of it. So I think you just have to realize, are you comfortable putting that out there? Being public with it. And if you are, just sort of crafting it as well as you can. When you send a release, you get to include 2 photos. I think, a lot of people try to do like really professional commercial type photos. And the ones that work best with, especially most publications, are ones that are a little more candid, a little more human element there.
Sure.
And I think that, putting that with the story can go really well, because journalists are having to put their stories online, and they know that if someone has a mediocre story, but this one is differentiated because it also has a couple of really great photos, then you stand a better chance of getting picked up, because they know that their online community is going to really respond and click through when they see this little thumbnail photo, in a roundup of stories, and click through to read it. So those are all things that can sort of work for you. Other things that you can do is like anything that you can do that is newsworthy. Sometimes if you don't have an idea, you can sort of take your business and take data that's already out there, like public data, and sort of aggregate it. And like, hey, we provide this product. 64% of people in our industry suffer from this. In fact, 12% will suffer to the point that this happens, and we solve it by this. So all of a sudden, you're sharing your story of your product and everything, but you're really grinding it and putting it, steady in there through data and numbers, because journalists love that. It's something that people can really latch on, and it can elevate a story. In addition to that, you can sort of put out your own data. You could do surveys or studies. I walk clients through this all the time. It's like you could do a study in your industry and send it out to the media. And almost every time we do that, you get anywhere from 4 to like 12 articles written based on your results in your press release. I recommend to ask 16 questions in a survey. use SurveyMonkey, 4 questions per page, 4 pages. So if someone stops halfway, you still got 8 responses, and you probably front loaded the most important questions first. And I get some pushback from people saying, I don't know who to send the survey to, but every industry is chock full of trade associations. Go to the small and independent ones in your industry, approach them and say, could you send this link to your members? In exchange, I'll mention you in a press release I'll be issuing over the wire. A lot of the small and independent trade associations don't get media love. It's the large ones that do. So they will often say, sure, we'll do it. Some might push back and say, hey, could we co-brand the survey? There's no downside to that. It's just you aligning yourself a little bit more with this organization. They send it out sometimes through email, sometimes through social media. Sometimes you'll get them to do both. Generally, if you receive 150 responses or more, it sort of passes the test that this is a valid survey. And you really want to ask relevant questions, things that are really interesting and topical right now in your industry. Again, talk to colleagues, talk to competitors if you want. Just the types of questions that would be like really timely right now. What's your marketing budgets look like over the next couple of quarters? Are you having difficulty hiring, or are you facing the prospect of possible layoffs, or are you finding it hard to maintain a culture post-pandemic? Are you having challenges getting people to work in the office again? All of these types of questions might be relevant for a particular industry, but they're all tied to right now, these times of flux. And the responses you get today will probably be completely different in 6 months or a year. And that's why you want to jump on them really quickly, get the responses, and then analyze it and say, what were the big surprises from this questionnaire of 16? What were the ones that people are probably going to respond to the best? Pick 2 or 3 of those questions and turn it into a story, put it in a press release, have amazing quotes in there about why you feel the numbers skewed a particular way, because you're now the expert. You're the one who did the survey. And you take that, you send it out. And like I said, often it yields between 4 and a dozen articles in your industry. And it's a great way to stand out. And people don't realize how difficult it is to get media. And here's a way that almost always works. And it does take a little bit more work. It's a little bit more of a challenge, but it does position you as an expert, and you will get articles as a result of it. You can take those articles and then, share them on your website, take them and share them with your clients, and more importantly, share them with your leads, because leads are always on the fence about whether they're going to work with you or not. And there's some that are like, they came to 49%, but they didn't go over the 50% mark of working with you, and therefore they didn't do business with you. But those people are more likely to tip over in your way if they read that article, because what happens when we read articles is there's this goodwill that happens. It's like third-party corroboration or social proof, this boost of credibility that a journalist chose you to write about that makes people feel warm and fuzzy. I've read lots of Kickstarter articles and blog posts where I then immediately take out my credit card and then go support the Kickstarter campaign. And sometimes they don't even happen, but it's something I felt good about. I felt positive, and I immediately wanted to do business. What I didn't do is what I do when I shop. I didn't open another browser and see if I could get this cheaper on Amazon or eBay. I didn't price it to see if I could get a better price. I felt good about this company. I wanted to do business with them. And what happens is a lot of times the customers you get as from these articles are very loyal, because they have this referral that came through a journalist, an article, a newspaper, and as a result, this authority is driving them to feel like we're with the right company, and we want to do business with them.
Right, and I think that's really what I've used podcasts in a similar way, where you're able to come on here and share what you're doing, which I love. I've used many services like yours. I don't think I've ever run into yours, but I've done press releases. I've paid for them. I've also just done them myself, which it certainly is a lot more effort to get press releases done yourself. LinkedIn news articles, although it's like not great, they're they're Google searchable. So if you have articles posted on you on LinkedIn about you and that you post, then that's like, it is Google searchable, but yeah, it's not going to go out to the masses the same way that a press release does. So let's just, I want to go down this vein. We're going to run out of time here, but I want to ask these questions in honor of my sibling here. So with, let's say when we're talking about surveys, what type, like, let's hone it to the conversation that's going to benefit her, because I'm selfish a little bit. And I think it'll help you see any industry that this will work in. Okay. So she's trying to sell pancakes. At the end of the day, she makes dry pancake batter. So how many different, this is what's going through my head, and you tell me if I'm on base or if I need to like correct my thought processes here. But in our family, we've got finance professionals, we've got electricians, so tradesmen, we've got people in construction, we've got people in the military, we've got all types. There's 11 kids, so there's a lot of people in different industries as a result of that. Could it be a separate press release to say, hey, the average construction worker, based on 150 responses or whatever, average construction worker likes their pancakes soft and fluffy over a little bit more firm, or they like this type of dressing out with syrup with their pancakes, or they like their pancakes to be 4 inches rather than 6 inches, and they want to eat 4 rather, whatever. Having these types of questions, how many are they going to have? And then construct your press release to say, look, my product is designed to cater to this type of person, or hey, we're not targeting this industry, but you're press releasing about information. It's data that is unique-ish. Like, why does anybody care if construction workers like pancakes? Maybe you don't, but maybe you do, or you go to IHOP and see if you can find the data of how many people order pancakes when they go to Denny's, IHOP, Village Inn, or whatever, to how many of them are going to be getting pancakes, what's the average size, and how many are they getting each order? I don't know. That's what I'm thinking about, like surveys. Is that the type of data that you would want?
Yeah, possibly. It when it comes to doing surveys and studies, the hardest part is brainstorming what questions to ask. And
that's why I'm brainstorming with you, Mickie.
Right. And so things you may want to ask is, or think about are, what are some things that would align you with sales possibly? And one could be like, I think of Mother's Day, because I remember as a child, at a certain age, I was able to have my father help me make pancakes to give my mother breakfast in bed. And, is there something there? Have you ever received pancakes in bed, from a loved one? It could be a question. And then you could go in a little bit deeper about that. Was it a child? Was it, a loved one? Who exactly was it? And some of the emotions that are there, and sort of, focus on that. You could actually even have fields. I do this sometimes in the survey where one of the fields is not multiple choice or yes, no. It's an open field where they can just enter their response. And we did this with a local auto shop in Pennsylvania, and they were doing a survey of other auto repair shops across the U.S. And the question we asked was, what's the strangest thing a person left in their car while being repaired? Statistically relevant, it was not, but the response was so intriguing that we decided to do a press release just on it first, and it did extremely well. It got picked up at a lot of places and achieved well beyond their goals of getting media coverage. And so are there opportunities there that have to do with pancakes and what pancakes mean? Pancakes are one of those things that are not extremely difficult to make, but they really give a sense of home and love and things like that. So I think, brainstorming questions around that, and until you find something that you can sort of envision putting together a press release on a particular subject. I think, aligning it around Valentine's Day or Mother's Day, a couple of months before you start planning something like that could make it so that you're doing a press release a few weeks before a holiday that really just, goes there and shares something in a heartwarming way that someone's like, wow, there's a great story here, and here's this great data, and we could put it together and have an amazing article. I think all of those things could potentially work there.
Okay, man, we're out of time. I'm so jealous, but the cool thing is all of you guys can go and ask more Mickie questions. I don't know what to call them, but clearly you can see like he took that, and I wasn't thinking about it, but he humanized, just like he was talking about. He mentioned it multiple times during the podcast. He humanized what makes pancakes more human. Well, maybe it came from a loved one. Maybe it's somebody making it. So I was going the other direction of like, what's the data, the size data, because that's where my mind thinks. But he's thinking like, okay, why does somebody want to read this article? Well, what's the meaning behind it? Not what's the data behind it, which is where Sam's mind thinks. But he took that and said, okay, well, what's the meaning behind the data? So if you're wondering, could he do that with my industry? Could he do that with my family? Could he do that with the thing that's important to me? Yes, he can. And that's why you pay a professional rather than, you can do it yourself, guys. There's nothing wrong with doing it yourself. On the other hand, if you do want to expedite the process and really get the best bang for your time, because time is one thing we can't replace. Mickie, where do they go get in touch with you if they wanted to use your firm to help them you do a press release on either their company or what it is they're experiencing? How would they go about contacting you?
Right. So our website is erleases.com. We have chat, phone, email, all my social media is on the lower right. I would also encourage people to check out erleases.com/plan, PLAN. It's a free video masterclass that I go through several winning strategies for press releases. The survey is just one of them, but there's several others that you could use. And if you start from there and build a PR campaign of 6 to 8 press releases and taking most of those from those strategic types of releases, you're going to work out really well. And again, that's at erleases.com/plan, PLAN. And it's completely free. It's less than an hour long, and it's a great place for anybody who's considering PR or at least open to it to sort of start there and think about their business in terms of those strategic types of releases.
I love it because, again, it's not always just business, but it could be anything. It could be your family reunion. It could be anything that you think is good news. I think there's yes, the contrarian view is really powerful, but there's sometimes a lack of just positive good news in our society because it doesn't always sell the best. But if you can make it intriguing and create a positive story about positive things, there are people who want to publish the positive things, just the heartwarming, good stories. And so being willing to, and vulnerable enough in your own life and family to share that positive news with others could make somebody else's day, could save somebody from ending their life. Could do a lot of things if they are able to see the positive in life. And so I think that your story matters. What's going on in your life and in your business matters. And there's a lot of people who are probably experiencing something similar that would love to know that there's other people out there experiencing it. I think COVID really did our society and country a disservice by taking us out of community and throwing us into houses and isolating us. And although it's not required by law, I think there's still a lot of people who live in isolation purely because that's what they're used to after 2 years of lockdown. And the result of that is less community. And I think this is a great way to start rebuilding the community, start building another community aspect into our lives and sharing those positive things or the things you're struggling with. Like, both are valuable because there's other people who are experiencing what you're experiencing. You don't know about it. They don't know that you exist. And there's strength in numbers. So anyways, I'm so grateful for your time, Mickie. I was really excited for this podcast. I got to answer some of the questions that I wanted to ask. I didn't get all of them, but such is life. Maybe we'll have to have another call sometime. Anything final that you want to say before we sign off here?
I think the biggest thing is that, don't feel like you're too small to matter. Journalists like to spotlight and cover small businesses. They don't like covering the well-funded ones, the big ones, because they can afford to advertise. They like to be seen as curators, and often it's the small companies, the mom and pops, that they do cover with articles. And so, don't feel that you're too small to matter.
Awesome. Hey, I love it. Thank you so much. And we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy Show.
Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me, and if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.